You're listening to the Primal Happiness Show, a podcast dedicated to helping you thrive in this crazy modern world. Every Tuesday, we explore the nature of how our minds really work, what exactly the human animal requires to thrive, and how we can live happier and more fulfilling lives. If you're new here and haven't yet taken our free class, then there's no better place to get a jump start on reclaiming your primal happiness. It's where we'll guide you step by step through our antidote to today's modern world. Simply head on over to primalhappiness.co/antidote to get the free class and discover how to thrive without having to move to a planet that's not so crazy as ours. But now, your host, Leanne Brook-Tyler.
Hello, my beautiful people. A huge warm welcome back to the show. In today's crazy modern world, men and women are living shallow, disconnected, and unfulfilling lives. So we created the path for those who are ready to reclaim their primal power and actualize their deepest gifts. And if you're feeling ready to go deeper with myself and Jonathan, go to primalhappiness.co/go deeper. Or you can book a free exploration call with one of us at primalhappiness.co/exploration. And as I've been mentioning, we've got our brand new offering, Waking the World Sovereign, dropping very soon. I'm hoping later this week. And you'll be able to find out all about it on our Go Deeper page. And it's very much the pinnacle of our work. We're bringing together all of the most deep, impactful ways that we know really, really create huge transformation for people. So more on that very, very soon. If you go to our Go Deeper page or book a free exploration call, then you will be one of the first to know. So on to this week's show. It's with Phil Goddard and it's Phil's third time on the show. Phil helps people create easy, prosperous and loving personal and professional relationships. He's an internationally renowned life and relationship coach, speaker, leadership consultant, and lover of life and humanity. A published author, he's also the host of the Coaching Life and Naked Heart podcasts. His work centers around transforming relationships and leadership through developing a deeply grounded understanding of the principles behind our human experience and the nature of how our experience of life is created. In this episode, Phil and I explored the role of desire in how we create our lives, the big life changes he's recently been through, and they're very big, and the way that he's seen fear, courage, and freedom show up during this time. Such a gorgeous topic. And as ever, Phil's just got this like beautiful, down to earth, honest way of talking about these things that I just think you'll love. Let's dive in. Phil, welcome back to the show for the third time.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really honoured, actually, to be on your wonderful show for a third time. Really beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. And we were just saying there's not very many people that have been invited back for a third time. So you're very special.
Thank you. Wonderful.
That's what that means. So we were just having a chat before we hit record about the topic. And I think it's one of those ones that's I think is going to end up going in all kinds of places that we've not planned. And I'm good with that. You know, like I trust you. I know that we've got like so much rich material here. So we're going to sort of kind of set out in a direction and then just see what gets created, I think.
Cool with that. Yeah.
Wonderful. So I think there's kind of two big themes that we're going to kind of deepen into. One is about the kind of big fork in the road and life change that you've had recently. And then there's also the impact of that on your relationships, but in a as I was just hearing, they're not directly related. It's just like you've had, and maybe this is kind of, there's some sort of like grand scheme in the universe where it was meant to all happen at the same time, even though it doesn't seem like they should have been connected, which often I notice is the case. So if we perhaps start with you just giving some background to like your story over the last, what is it, like 3 months, 2 months, something like that. And then let's just kind of see where we go from there.
I think it probably started a little earlier than that, but so I'm currently in Bali, and I've been here coming up to 2 months, and I've no idea how much longer I'll be here. But I did come here with the mindset of, right, I'm going to go and live in Bali. It wasn't a case of, right, I'm going to go to Bali for a holiday, and I might be here another month. I might stay long. I really have no idea. Very open-minded about it, but I've come here with that mindset of living here, and I guess for somebody who, aside from years ago, I was dating someone in the US, so I used to go there for sort of 2 or 3 months at a time. But aside from that, I've always lived in my hometown. Indeed, my mother actually sleeps in the bedroom I was born in for centuries. It's kind of sweet. So we tend not to move around very much. But when was it? July, actually, I moved out of this apartment that I moved in 9.5 years ago, with the intention of staying there 6 months after my marriage, after second marriage separation, and until I worked out what to do with my life. And I guess there's an element of that you can see, well, it's taken me 9.5 years to realize I don't even really know what to do with the rest of my life, just what to do now and perhaps in the immediate future. And so there was looking back, it looks like there's a lot of reasons and meaning for deciding to sell and donate and get rid of pretty much all of my belongings. A few things in my mother's attic, but and move out. And so, arrived in Bali, say coming up for 2 months ago with a suitcase. And in a way that I guess it could look like it's a massive move, because I had a very stable life. It's easy. I was living in a so-called luxury apartment in a very desirable part of my hometown in Ipswich on the waterfront there. And I had a lot of habits, some not so good, but it was, I had felt this urge. Like I say, it goes back probably at least a couple of years that my time there was done. And if you believe in that kind of thing, and I'm a little bit on the fence about it, are we getting signs? I think things happen and we add meaning, but there was certainly a lot of stuff that was happening, particularly around friendships, that I could make mean, it's time to move on.
So just to understand, would you have described yourself as happy? Prior, were you kind of searching for a way to be happier at the time, or were you kind of fairly content with life as is, and even though you were having these nudges?
No, not happy for what looked like a number of reasons, right? That I wasn't happy with myself for still being there, because I acknowledged that I had that desire in me to get out of there and do something. And there's a huge world out there, which I've seen very, very little of. The friendships thing, which we can expand on a bit more, of course. Friendships seem to be changing. Some friendships had dissolved. I spent a lot of time on my own, feeling isolated, but then also not necessarily doing much about that, actually. So, I guess in a way, my life felt it become stagnant. And of course, I take full responsibility for that. But when you feel stagnant, you don't feel happy.
Yes, that makes so much sense. Yeah. Yeah. So a couple of, there's like two different directions I want to take this in. So let's hope we'll choose one and then let's see if we end up circling back to the other. So you're talking there about, we can either take the view that there is, I guess, the languaging I would use, it doesn't necessarily, you don't have to necessarily use the same language, but the language I would use, and this is something I guess I've chosen to embrace, this way of seeing it. It's not necessarily kind of like because it is the only way or I think it's true necessarily. It's just more and more, this feels like a rich way to live my life, is my soul is kind of calling me towards things. And it can do that in a number of ways. You sort of described, we get these nudges, these signs, this kind of way where increasingly, even though it's not necessarily the easy path, we get pulled towards certain choices, certain ways of living. And that's definitely not how I've always seen it. That's just something over the last couple of years, and then really clearly in the last few months even, that's how I'm kind of seeing life. And I absolutely don't think that's how, necessarily correct or how everyone should see it. Yeah. And then there's this other way that you're talking about, which is to say, life is essentially meaningless, and you can attribute meaning to things. But you're almost like recognizing you're kind of doing so. I'd love to know just like where you're coming from on that. Like what's your view on that?
Well, I think, when I look at my own situation, I think there was this desire, I could describe it as saying there was this heartfelt desire deep within me. It might be a soulful desire, whatever word we want to use, but certainly within me, there was this desire to get out of that life. And in the same way, whilst I think there's something in this whole law of attraction business, which I actually much rather describe as a law of creation rather than attraction. But aside from that, I also think there's like a law of recognition. So when we have, if you like, in our mind, in our awareness, that we want to do something, then opportunities to do that become more visible to us. And that's not to say that those opportunities didn't exist before our awareness was increased. So if I decided, I want to come to Bali, and there were opportunities, I could interpret the fact of seeing them as, the universe is supporting me, and that opportunity has come about because of my desire. And I'm not sure. Like I saw a meme once, Leanne. It said, I've been to the center of the universe. You weren't there, which I kind of like, because I think that whole idea that the universe is conspiring either against me or for me is kind of self-obsessive in a way. And that's just my opinion, right? But I think it looks to me that, if I bring into my awareness a particular direction that I want to move with my life, it's kind of that, everybody's heard this analogy that, right, I'm going to get a new car. I want to buy a black BMW. And then you just start seeing loads of black BMWs, which were there anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I think this, I love having these kind of conversations, because more and more I see that we get to, I'm always like cautious when I say these things, almost like we've reached a level. We're at this yay, we're at this level of consciousness. It's not really what I mean, but I notice my friends and, podcast guests, sometimes they're the two and the same thing, who have been on this journey for years. I think we get to a place where we are like knowingly choosing a way of being, a way of seeing the world that empowers us. That is like the juiciest way to live. And it's not necessarily true. It's just kind of whatever feels like it just serves us best. So I love what you're saying there. It's kind of like right now, that feels like the kind of the way that works for you.
Yeah. And having said that, I also love the quote. I can't remember any more of it than I'm going to share. And I can't even remember who said it, but it's the moment one commits, providence moves too. In fact, if you just Google those words, it'll come up with the whole quote. The moment one commits, providence moves too. So in a way, that quote's backing up like, well, providence, the universe, whatever, does support you. And I have to say that when I decided to move out of my apartment, that came about by spending a friend of mine, a mutual friend of mine, Philip Bartu, we both know him. He invited me to just hang out with him for a weekend in Barcelona. And I had already been toying with the idea of getting out of my hometown because of it feeling so stagnant or whatever. And it's like, well, we're moving to Bali, and they went, and they've since left. But that kind of inspired me. That really inspired me. And I could say, oh, well, maybe that was the reason that I got invited to go to Barcelona, to support me in choosing to leave. But I don't think we can ever really know. It was just a case of that was in my awareness, and therefore the conversations that we had went in that direction.
Yeah. And like you say, we'll never know.
No, we'll never know. But one thing is for sure is that that desire, the desire to do something different, just kept increasing and got to a point where I couldn't ignore it any longer.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And that word desire and synonyms for it too, whether you want to call it longing, craving, pull towards something. I've just over the last year really seeing the power of that. I think, again, particularly those of us who've been on a spiritual path that in one way or another, I may not directly do this, but one way or another kind of almost says that that's kind of like not a healthy place to come from. Like we shouldn't have desire, we shouldn't have attachment. Even if it's not said directly, it's kind of pointing in that direction. And in the last year, I've really felt very differently about that. Really seen like, wow, it's that real catalyzing force in the universe. Like that things can be created from a really gorgeous like place that we can tap into and create from. So I love that you've said that. And what's your journey about that? You and I have had a similar path in terms of both come from, probably there was a bit before this, but both definitely walked the three principles path for a while. What's been your relationship to desire, having come from that place?
So I think my relationship to desire hasn't been particularly healthy for the vast majority of my life, in quelling it, ignoring it, a lot of social conditioning at play, and perhaps even in first coming across the three principles, gosh, I don't know when it was, 2007, 2008, kind of using that understanding of, this is kind of just my thinking. It doesn't, and all meaning is created by me. I could give those desires even less credence to make it even easier to live the quiet, stagnant life. But there's a flip side to that as well. Also, really, that I've seen from that understanding is that I can handle anything. I can handle anything. And indeed, so somebody asked me in this interview that I did just at the weekend, gosh, that sounds like it took a lot of courage to make the kind of move that you've done. And kind of threw me a bit because I'd never even considered that it takes courage, because courage is only as relevant as fear. Courage is only as relevant as the relevance that you give to fear. And I'm not saying I don't experience fear. I do experience fear, a lot of fear, but I don't give it much relevance because I just know it's not a case of I'm never sad or never upset or anything like that. I just know that I can handle that. So I'm not looking to avoid what we might call unpleasant, uncomfortable experiences. Like I think from that understanding, I'm much more all in with life. And indeed, a few things that have happened over the last couple of years. Indeed, 2017 was a very tough year for a number of reasons. But having got through that and had a huge insight at the end of that year, just really seeing how made up that all is. Having got through it, and I had some times of weeping in the fetal position on the floor in my lounge. So yes, I'm all in, and even that we can handle it. We can handle it. So to me, it's like, well, there's so much here for us to experience and explore. So much richness that I guess I'm not as risk averse as I was even 2 years ago.
Yeah, I really love that. And I think I've noticed for myself, there's a tendency, which has lessened over the years, but definitely still shows up, to wait for fear to diminish so that I can do something. And then more and more realize, that's just not how it works. Like the fear is going to stay present. And then there's what I would call courage. And I appreciate for you, that's not how you're relating to it, but there's the courage grows enough for me to take action despite the fear. And then I kind of go through that whole process again with something else that scares me. And it just keep doing that over and over, rather than kind of thinking there'll be this place, this time where suddenly the fear is just not there. It sounds as though, for me, that, like, it does feel like courage. It kind of recognizes that, I recognize that I'm taking action despite the fear feels to me like courage. It feels like you're doing the same thing, but you don't relate to it as courage.
Well, I think it is because of the relevance of fear. So I think even acknowledging, oh yes, I have this fear, having kind of that internal dialogue, however briefly it might be, it's like, gosh, yes, of course I'm scared. But yeah, I can do this. There's no point in waiting. I'm always going to be scared. And therefore it looks like there's something that carries you past that story of fear, which we're calling courage. But when I think about some of the, and of course I've experienced that also, but around this move, if somebody asked me, were you scared? I would have had to stop and think, oh, hang on. Yeah, I can get in touch with the experience of fear. Yeah, okay. Because it's just giving it so little attention. That dialogue wasn't really going on. And actually, I think it was because there were some other things. The things around, it just felt that it was time. It was like, it was time to make this move. It was time to get out of my hometown, and because of those friendships dissolving. And so, yeah, that was much more relevant to me, how stale life had got, really. And that desire to be drawn, the moving towards that was just so much more relevant to any fear.
Yeah.
And again, that's my personal experience. There certainly I have been in situations as you describe where I'm having some kind of dialogue with fear, of which I would be using courage to overcome.
Yes, that makes total sense. It really does. So let's go there, because this idea of life, relationships, no longer feeling like they're for you. I find a really fascinating topic, because I've definitely had similar experiences. And I think, and again, all of this, what I'm about to say, is made up, like who the hell actually knows? But sometimes it seems as though that actually is the case, that for whatever reason that's served me up until that point, and then no longer does. There's just kind of like, for whatever reason, the what was there for me is no longer there. Other times I've noticed that it could be that I've got resistance to like moving more deeply into that relationship or to do what's required to transform that relationship. And it's very interesting to me, and that could just be like my own patterns, that in some ways it's easier for me to kind of end something and walk away from it than actually do what's required. Like it's scarier for me actually to kind of do what's required to alchemize that relationship. And it's always kind of with this like, oh, is this the time when it actually should be over and it's stagnant and it's time for me to move on? Or is this time for me to actually like move towards it? And that's where my growth is. And I think that's what's interesting all the time. I think in these life experiences, that could be a job, it could be a relationship, anything. And so I'd love to know your thoughts on that, like how you're feeling into that, if that even is something that you've experienced.
Yeah, and just to add some context, if you'd asked me a year or so, maybe a little more than that, a year or so ago, who my closest friends were, I would have given you a list of 6 names, and I'm no longer friends or active friends with any of those 6 people.
Wow.
So that's quite a change.
Yeah, quite a change.
And of course, it's in a lot of respects, yes, that's been incredibly challenging and upsetting in many respects. I mean, one of those friendships, I'd known the guy for 36, 37 years. Maybe it's even longer than that. I'm not sure, because I think I'm older than I think. And a couple of other friends, our friendship was 20 years.
Goodness.
But the thing is, particularly with those, gosh, I mean, so I had a friend from 30 odd years. I was just a boy. I was a very young teenager. And of course you change. And he was like a brother to me, maybe more than that in a lot of respects. The friendship was kind of deeper than that. But you can't not change over that kind of period of time, and even over the 20 years. And there is that temptation to try and make those work, or have lots of judgment that it should work. Come on, we've been friends all our lives. We should be able to sort this out. But to see very clearly that we have different ideas about life, very, very different, that are really quite incompatible. And I think if I met those people now, we probably wouldn't be friends. They wouldn't be people that we just really have that kind of vibe with, and that desire to want to hang out with and do things with. We want to be doing different things. So it was interesting, really, to reflect on that and accept that these friendships had come to a natural end. And I have this pattern as well, actually. I can also observe in relationships just to hold on for longer than is perhaps healthy, certainly than is necessary. And looking back, I can see in particular those 3 friendships, the longest ones, they had changed way before I had even accepted that. In fact, of those 20-year friendships, it was one of they were a couple, and the guy sent me a text after we'd exchanged some words. When we met up, we bumped each other. He sent me a text and basically said, "We haven't been friends for a long time." And so it was that gulp. Wow, yeah, that's how you see it. I wasn't seeing that. I was kind of clinging on to that.
Goodness.
So,
ouch.
Yeah. I mean, that hurt, because I thought, but we are friends, even though, have different ideas about life. But some friendships just aren't forever. It's very rare, actually, that friendships are forever. So, and again, just coming back, that definitely played into. I don't know if it played into the decision or the choice, but it certainly played into the thinking that I had around, do I want to get out of my hometown? Because it looked like there was less there for me to stay. So in fact, that became a liberation for me to no longer be chasing those friendships that also gone very stale.
Yeah. It's I've got several thoughts come up around those long-term friendships. And like you say, I think we can have quite a lot of baggage and shoulds around that. And then there's also, on the flip side, it's funny because I'm having a conversation with my husband just last night about friendships. And I think, like with anything we're talking about here, we can choose to sort of empower it however we want. And the conversation we were having, I was saying, I think there's some friendships where you can kind of create them as family, with the understanding that it's not that you should do that, but that's an option. And in this instance, that's kind of how I'm creating these friendships, in that they will morph and change over the years, because we've all got different life events happening, different sort of changes internally, and that will be mirrored in our friendship group. And just like with family, we ride that out. We will kind of morph and change with that, and that will look different year to year. And I'm sort of choosing into that's how it's being created. And that's not to say that has to be always that way, but right now that's how it looks to me. Only partly maybe that's because I don't actually have very much in the way of surviving family either. So that's like a particularly, in some ways that's easier, because I haven't also got that going on with a real life family, which, a lot of people, you expend that kind of energy there. I don't have that. So I'm expending that energy there instead. But I also recognize that we can do that very, very almost like automatically and unconsciously too. Like not choose willingly into like, oh, that's how I'm going to create it, but almost by default, like, oh my goodness, who would like choose to end friendships or move on from friendships? Like surely, as you say, when you've been friends for all those years, like as if you do that. And I think what I'm just seeing is kind of just getting to that place where we are able to kind of have the altitude and that sovereignty to actually just choose what we're creating here. There's no like should at all. We can choose.
Totally. Yeah. And I had for a few years been clinging on to all of those shoulds. That we should be friends, and a whole bunch of reasons why that was. But like I say, it's been liberating really to see that in a new light, and to see, gosh, one of those friends I would often call up and it would feel like I was begging for us to meet up. It was, plainly obvious really that they just didn't want it. It's like they didn't want it for whatever reason. And the truth is, I still don't really know. And that's another thing that's kind of gone on, that sometimes we feel we do really need to understand. But I've seen, no, I don't. I actually don't need to understand. And there's even freedom in letting go of that. So there's definitely a freedom in letting go of all of the shoulds. And all of that, again, I guess perhaps it's social conditioning. And so I had a breakup a few years ago, and one of my friends kind of, he tried to support me, but he then found it very difficult. So he backed off. And, another friend is saying, well, do you see much of him? I'm like, no, he says he can't handle what's going on with me at the moment. And my friend said, well, that's his effing job to be there for you. And I thought, well, yeah, I kind of like that idea, but that's completely made up, right? He doesn't have to be there for me at all. We don't have to be there for anyone. That is also just made up. So I think it's beautiful out of all of this, there's some, it sounds kind of poetic in a way, doesn't it? To say, well, out of the space of those friendships dissolving, there's some other beautiful connections that have appeared. I use this phrase a lot with my clients. Like, what's it like to let love in? What if you just let more love in? And I feel so blessed that the friends I have, such is the way of the world. A lot of them are what I would call e-friends. So they are, people that perhaps I've never met in person, but we have a lot of video calls and whatever we're. Again, there are some other friendships as well, which we do meet face to face. And I think all the energy I was putting into chasing the friendships that have essentially gone stale, is now much better served maintaining these other beautiful connections and friendships. So it's a case really of letting go of all the rules. Sometimes I've worked with a few clients who cling on to the idea that we have to like and love our parents or our siblings. And once you get past the conditioning of that, there's always this sense of freedom. Like, I remember one client in particular just burst into tears with absolute relief. Like, I can stop trying to like my mother. Like, wow. So there's so many rules, I guess, that we buy into, not just about friends, but all kinds of relationships. And I think it's a beautiful thing to start looking at those, brushing those away, and then see what is there.
Mine's went in very similar direction, because I was just thinking, everything we've just said absolutely applies to family too. But that's obviously a place where we typically have even more rules and baggage and should, but it's all still just as much up for grabs.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. I'm intrigued, actually. I'm trying to think, like, is this relevant to this particular episode? I don't know, but I'm feeling myself drawn there. And maybe it is, because I think it's the thing I'm about to ask you, just so in case you get nervous, is around your work and your coaching practice. Nothing else. But I was just thinking how, it actually is relevant, like kind of what we're doing out there in the world to serve, I think is really relevant to, the choices we make, the path we take. What has been the impact, if any, on your work, having made this choice to basically completely change your life?
And I think because it's relatively recent, I couldn't tell you, because I'm sure there's impacted in ways that I don't see yet. Is there anything obvious? I think, that whole Me Too thing is so powerful. So when people see, when we hear of others, particularly if we're in a closer relationship, like such as a coaching relationship, use that term, oh, you doing that has given me permission to do that. And of course, that's not technically really what's going on, but it just feels like it stirs something in us when we see somebody we're close to, we see them doing something or behaving in a way, or perhaps expressing themselves in ways that we're inspired by. That stirs something in us. So, so there have been, conversations around, again, fear and honoring what's in your heart, and really, what if you allowed yourself to entertain your desires? I loved what you said earlier, that very often we will not even want to even talk about them because of potential, like what might happen about that. And whereas I guess I've been a bit, somebody said to me, gosh, it could be a bit of a car crash. I'm like, well, yeah, so what, kind of thing. It's, just to wrap that up, I don't really know, but I'm sensing that the fact that I guess my friend would describe theirs fear. In fact, one of my friends who lives here in Bali, I've known him since I was 16. And I know they mentioned me to another mutual friend of ours, and he said something like, Phil's still in that bloody flat, like he won't get out of there, And so maybe I had that kind of bit of a reputation. And sometimes I have moments where I've surprised myself that I've given that all up. And then other times it's like, yeah, it's no big deal. It's no big deal. So I think just bringing that into conversations with my clients, I don't know whether it's reassuring, but I guess it brings something.
Oh my goodness, so much. I love that you've brought it to this. Firstly, I think that power of, I was going to say like modeling, role modeling, but I actually think is actually something even more powerful than that. I think there is something about witnessing someone else in a kind of expansion and expression that actually isn't just that kind of personal modeling, but it actually, we feel it on a more kind of like archetypal level, like you could, for example, call it, I don't know, the hero's journey. But I think there is something that allows us to kind of recognize that this isn't just for them. There is an archetype that's being modeled there that's also accessible and relevant to us too. And this is something that I've definitely felt resistance to, kind of like recognizing how I'm providing that to others. And I think, there is almost like a false humility, and maybe it's partly being a Brit, I don't know. But, like if we are putting ourselves out there as coaches, leaders, podcast hosts, whatever, we'll inevitably reach a point where we are sometimes going to provide that to other people. We are going to be that model. And there is kind of both power and responsibility that comes with that. And I see that over and over again now, and also not just with me, but for example, I'm at the moment leading Awaken the Wild Feminine. We circled last night. And I'm often saying to the women how like they're providing that to each other. Each time they're willing to be seen in their truth, use their voices. They're modeling to other women like, this is possible. This is safe. This is, gorgeous. This is what life's made of. And it is so powerful. So is. So I love that you've said that. And again, there is always this like, oh God, I can't possibly name that I've been a model for someone, but like, hell, you are.
And I think it's Byron Katie who says something like, the least risk you can take in life is being honest with everyone.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I see, I get inspired by my clients too, who are because we do strip away those ideas, those concepts, all of that conditioning. Let's get in touch with, like, I'm not really asking. I started writing about this the last couple of days I'm not delving in to find out what it is they want, but because that appears when you shift away all of that noise, like you then can't keep it out. When there's a space for your desires to appear, that you can't stop that. That. And so I can look, when it looked like my life with that stuff falling away, And just simply asking myself that question, well, what is here for me? And it was kind of empty. I mean, my dear mother and my siblings live local and whatever, and I do still have one friend in town. He's kind of that friend we see each other a couple of times a year. But there was space. There was then space for me to honor. Finally, there was space for me to honor that desire, which I didn't have to search for that. It just kept showing up.
Yeah. Oh wow. There's so much here that I just think is sometimes it takes these kind of quite extreme experiences. You giving up your hometown life where you were, moving to the other side of the world, ending all these friendships, to see that pattern that's shown up for you is actually something that's showing up for all of us all the time. It's just not as obvious, I think, when it's not got that kind of, ta-da, lights. This is an extreme. But I think there's so much in this that, again, is available for all of us. And if we may not have necessarily that wide open space created that you had, where, there is nothing left there for you. So it's easier to distill, this way. But I think we can consciously choose into creating that space in all kinds of ways. I mean, even as you're saying, in the space of a coaching conversation, that's a space where we can start to see what's for us. And there's many other ways too. I love that. I really do. I'd love just to hear if there's anything else you would like to say, either on that topic or as we're kind of just getting towards the end of the show, anything else that you think would be helpful to listeners who are perhaps feeling that call to something else, feeling that kind of connection with their desire and pulling forward into a path which might hold some fear.
Yeah, well, I think I started to touch on this, but time and time again with my clients that being willing to explore that desire doesn't mean you have to act on it, but acknowledging it, giving it some credence, some attention, allows you to really listen to it and hear what that has to say. And then you can, to the extent that we do actually make any decisions and choose, but I think really listening to that, you don't have to, that doesn't mean that you're going to, throw your whole life away and upset the whole status quo. But what I do see, particularly with clients, is when we do start to look over and over and over again, I guess I'm becoming less surprised because I kind of just matter of fact, this is what happens. But certainly the clients become very surprised at how easy it can be without the disruption that people do fear, how easy it is to be able to honor that desire. And certainly that happens in relationships, clients who are perhaps in a relationship and they would like something to change. There's a particular something in that aspect of that relationship. And just really exploring that as a first step. It's I would encourage people just to take that step of just having a closer look.
Yeah. I love you brought it back there. In fact, I can kind of now see that, I said at the start, I'm not quite sure, what this is going to be about. And I just feel like I love the way that we've kind of kept touching back on the power of desire. Love that. Well, thank you so much, Phil. If anyone's like to find out more about you, get in touch, see what the work that you do, where's the best place to find you?
I'm fairly accurate on Facebook and I made it really easy to connect with me. You can find my profile by actually going to fbphil.com, fbphil.com. And I have a podcast and there's a few bits and pieces on my website, which is philg.com, but Facebook's where it's at, really. Thank you so much, Leanne. Thank you. Thank you. I've really enjoyed this, as expected.
Thank you so much. It's always such a pleasure to speak to Phil, and what a gorgeous topic that was. When we're getting the nudges to make a change to our lives is likely to show up alongside fear. That doesn't mean we should stop or wait until the fear isn't present, which may never happen. We can create a different relationship to fear where we acknowledge its presence and move ahead anyway. We don't have to play within the pre-drawn lines of the shoulds handed down to us by our family or culture. We can trust ourselves to create life, including our relationships, according to our own values and desire. Give yourself permission and create the space to make contact with your desire. Doesn't mean you have to act upon it. And also, as Phil said, you might well find out that it doesn't have to mean a complete change of life to do so. So if you'd like to get the notes and links for everything we spoke about this week, hop on over to the show notes and they're at primalhappiness.co/episode 262. And if you're feeling ready to go deeper with myself and Jonathan to reclaim your primal power and actualize your deepest gifts, go along to primalhappiness.co/go deeper, or you can book a free exploration call with one of us at primalhappiness.co/exploration. If you don't want to miss out on next week's episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, or your Android or iOS app of choice and hit that subscribe button. That way you're going to get each episode delivered straight to your device as if by magic as soon as it comes out. Thank you so much for listening. You've been wonderful. Catch you again next Tuesday.